Hello again, it's time for another ITS UK discussion about the implications of the coronavirus crisis on transport and specifically transport technology. I'm Paul Hutton, Communications Manager of ITS UK, and I'd like to remind you first of all to make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, not just for these discussions, but for a wide range of other knowledge sharing webinars from our various forums. I'm really pleased to have another one-to-one chat this week with one of our most knowledgeable members, Andy Graham from White Willow Consulting. Now, Andy and I have known each other for nigh on 20 years and worked with each other on and off on different projects through that time. So I'm delighted to welcome him to this discussion. Andy's the sort of guy who, if you were to look into just about any intelligent transport systems project over the last 25 years, you would not be surprised to find that Andy was involved in it. I'm not saying he was involved in every single one, but I'm saying that he's been involved in many, and you're never surprised by the breadth of the different projects that he has had his fingers in. So, Andy, thank you for joining us. As I say, we've been working together on and off for 20 years, and I don't think any of us would have ever expected a government to have been telling us to use our car more. So strange times we're in.
Absolutely. I mean, all emails are now finished off with "stay safe" rather than "kind regards." What a world we're in. And there's been obviously some tragic circumstances and some horrible outcomes. But I think we've all got to look positively for our profession and for people who travel about what's actually come positively from this. You know, you and I were talking the other day about the fact that transport data is now interesting. In fact, we used to have a blue line drawn in the 5 o'clock briefing at Downing Street of what road traffic patterns were like. And, you know, and a lot of people suddenly didn't realise that's what traffic looks like in the UK. We had people from the BBC getting very panicky because guess what? Mondays were busier than Sundays, as if there was a real change. So I'm quite positive that some good will come out of this, and particularly in terms of the value of data that for years lots of people have been collecting and using it in operational things and to design better road networks, but now it's seen as a bit more of a strategic asset. A lot of the new technologies that we've got in terms of things like image processing has been used for social distancing measurement. We've been using data from GPS-equipped vehicles to look at patterns. We've been using Wi-Fi around towns. We've been using smart parking data to see where people are travelling to and from, and obviously not going into town and parking. So I think it's been a really good window to showcase some of the tech that's kind of been in the back room. We've mentioned the phrase Cinderella many times. I think also the fact that we're now able to ask questions about how we want to travel. There's very little morning peak at the moment because schools haven't really gone back yet. When they do go back, we'll start to see real significant morning peaks again. The evening peak is there. There's lots of internet delivery trucks, that kind of thing. Lots of leisure trips now. Seeing a lot of cycling, but particularly when the weather's good. Whether that will sustain, don't know. Looks a bit grey out there at the moment in Surrey. Could be raining any minute. But also in terms of walking, you know, the amount of money that's been spent, and also in terms of the ability to do experimental schemes and put things in quickly. You know, we've done things much more quickly than we used to do. What there is, though, is perhaps sometimes a gap in the actual how to do it. So it's great saying, do this stuff, but when there's no real guidance about how to do it. So we're moving at a faster pace, I think, than we've done for a long time. I think we're seeing the value of sharing things like data and sharing technology. Whether we'll go back to exactly where we came from, I'm not sure, but I don't think we'll be very far off. And there's lots of people who had opinions over the last few months about how the new world will change. I'm a great believer of people like Steve Gooding's view of the world is that perhaps in cities, inner cities, cycling and walking will come to dominate. But I personally couldn't see myself cycling to central London for 25 miles. I'll still want to take the train, whether I take the train all the way or whatever, I don't know. So there will have been massive change in some of our commuting patterns. I think also a lot of the idea in terms of, I was pleased to see that freight kind of dropped for a bit and then caught up very quickly. Just shows you how much of the freight on our roads is food and important stuff, and maybe some construction materials. The 20% of freight that isn't there is now starting to catch up. That'll be things like fashion and leisure gear and that kind of stuff. But it really, really reinforces the supply chain that it's all about food in this country, and how much of it is on the motorways, keeping our supermarkets full. So I think, all in all, transport's come out with a new understanding by most people, starting to think about how they might travel. I think the data that we've got has been used by, and I've practiced saying this word, epidemiologists, to look about how the spread of COVID-19. So who'd have thought origin and destination matrices were of interest to biologists? And I think the fact that we're not seen as a bit of a silo, that we're actually out there trying to help people with spread our data, has been really good. I think ITS UK, Transport Technology Forum, lots of industrial players have kind of forgotten the rule book and gone on and done stuff and worried about how to mop it all up later on, which has been very good. And I think that spirit hopefully will continue.
So much to ask you about just from that answer, Andy, but I want to rewind first of all to almost the very beginning of the crisis, when I answered the call on behalf of ITS UK for helping you gather local authorities together to share the data that, frankly, you and I have been talking about the need to do for like 20 years, but along came the crisis, and within a day you were inundated with people wanting to help you with data from their own authority. Tell me how that all panned out.
Well, that was really interesting. That one of the reasons we wanted that was because DFT's got good traffic flow statistics on motorways, and it's got them on trunk roads. But what it doesn't have is the real local position inside towns, but also on those kind of roads that are important to towns and cities in terms of their strategic roads rather than necessarily national ones. So we put out a call for, particularly for traffic flow data, that we could access. That was a time series before and after COVID, that we could access online easily, and that we knew the provenance of. What was interesting, I think there's three groups. One was people who had data that they could just publish straight away, or they could write an API and publish straight away. There were a second group who kind of knew they had an API somewhere, or they bought one, but they weren't really sure, or their suppliers were able to do it for them. And the third group who kind of really, with all the best of intentions, perhaps a little bit later, was saying, oh, I've got a source of traffic data, but I've only counted it once a week. And then there was another group who, to be honest, really showed up where the lack of investment to local authorities who say, I'd love to show you data, but none of my sensors work. And of course, there are lots of innovators who said, oh, I can build you a traffic flow counting gizmo if only you give me £1 million in 3 months, as usual, trying to reinvent the wheel. So it's very interesting the way that it panned out, but very soon with the colleagues from Arups, we were able to get a good solid set of traffic flow stats all over the country that were then used to kind of show that the temperature gauge, if you like, of the dashboard of COVID, that traffic had dropped, and to monitor whether it was going to come back. And we've seen that very slow, gradual increase. We're particularly interested in cycling, we're interested in trucks, so we've been looking at freight flows. And then that opened up a whole nother vista, which is if people aren't travelling, where are the few that are travelling still going to? So parking data was really used for that. We've got some good stuff with our friends from API there, and then from the British Parking Association. And also what's really interesting is a lot of suppliers said, Siemens, for example, said, I've got loads and loads of data in the cloud. If our clients can give you permission, we can provide it to you. And then all of a sudden, the floodgates would open. I think what was very interesting is the fact that we have a traffic manager in each local authority. Under the Traffic Management Act, you have to have a defined term with a capital T and a capital M. It'd be nice to have a data manager, somebody with a capital D and a capital M, that you could ring up and say, how can I get hold of your data? Because it was clear that many local authorities, there were perhaps 2 or 3 people who had data, some bit of duplication. I think one of the lessons I'd be suggesting to DFT is that idea of somebody who's responsible for the data for the next time when we get another pandemic, or we might get really bad weather. And by the way, Brexit hasn't gone away yet. We've still got to deal with that. So I think someone who is a central point for data in a local authority that DFT know, then we won't have to call on ITS UK and other people. We go straight to them for the next time. So as usual, it's not the technology that's the problem here. It's not the communications. It's not really the finance. What it is often about organisation and institutional stuff. So lots and lots of lessons to learn. But hopefully we won't just sort of shut down this idea of a depository of UK local authority data. We'll keep it going. That could then nicely merge into the national access point, projects like Convex in the Midlands looking for suppliers of data. So, you know, we've got to take the positive from this and not just shut it off when it's no longer needed. Let's keep a legacy from it.
Absolutely. Now, of course, the TTF is now publishing a summary of the data that you've been gathering every Wednesday lunchtime, which is really positive, and we share that through ITS UK. But I want to just pick up on the interesting point that you made about the fact that some authorities actually had the ability to share their data, but didn't know they had the ability. Has that also opened up something else, that maybe there are loads of other bits of technology and add-ons to software that they've bought that they're not using in the same way as I probably only use 1% of all the functionality of PowerPoint, for example? Are there potentially authorities that have loads of really clever software that can do loads of really clever things for them, and they're just completely unaware and therefore not using it?
I think it's not so much the software. I think it's probably they've got a load of sensors or traffic counters where they access it through one way, but their supplier has provided at no charge another way. Probably there's been need for a bit of awareness and training. I think in other projects I've seen in the past is you find that a sensor can record various things in different ways. You've configured it to do it in one way, but it can do many others. So our friends at Vivacity, for example, are very good in terms of their image processing cameras that count cycles and pedestrians, for example. Very quickly they repurposed those so they could measure how far they were apart. And again, I think a lot of this is the suppliers were very good in saying, you may not know this, but we can provide your data if you let us. So I think, again, there's something there about awareness of what's available. I think also we found in the past that quite a lot of the time, the technology, as I say, you never have time to read the manual. It's a bit like your new car. You never buy a new car and read 500 pages of the manual. So sometimes people focus quite rightly on their day job, the one of which they're financed to do and they're judged by the performance of, but never get a chance to just do that a little bit more. But now I think there's as you mentioned, there's the newsletter, but I think there's a good opportunity to do a kind of wrap up of what lessons did we learn, very short and brief, once we all have time to focus on the day job again, just to make sure we don't lose all these lessons.
Everyone keeps talking about the new normal, and obviously there's an issue at the moment with things like mobility as a service and shared mobility generally, because people are worried about social distancing, how close they're going to be to people. They're reluctant to actually get in a vehicle that someone else has already been in, and without it being cleaned in between. Is this an issue on all the work that we've been doing on Mars and CAV, and what can we as an industry do to mitigate people's concerns? Okay,
so let's split those up into several things. I think what we've shown from connected vehicles is that data from a particular vehicle is really useful, and we've always been saying that. New normal won't impact that. I think for AVs, automated vehicles, I'm a bit of a skeptic. I think the business case isn't really strong, but for things like remote deliveries of food and remote waste collections, that kind of thing, we could see certainly a stronger case now with COVID-19. Friends at Southampton University using drones to get blood samples from the Isle of Wight that previously used to take several hours to get across in an ambulance. All that stuff I can see happening. I've always been a bit of a skeptic about mobility as a service. I think, particularly in terms of shared ownership, it works well in cultures and cities where that kind of thing is accepted. I'm not sure with my parochial hat in the UK it would work that well. like you say, I think there's a big question mark about it in an area where you've got a large cosmopolitan, metropolitan, very high turnover, very high occupancy of a vehicle. It does start thinking a bit like that's a way to spread a virus. The cost of then taking that vehicle out and cleaning it and repurposing it, particularly if it's automated, that might blow the business model. I think there'll still be cases for it, but I really think it's another question mark over we'll all go to work in a shared pod when people are unwilling to go to work in a shared train without having to wear a mask and all that kind of stuff. And I certainly would feel twice about getting in a underground train at the moment because I'm old and fat and semi-diabetic and semi-asthmatic. Maybe it's a generational thing, but I do feel that mass has been hyped a bit, and I think this is another area where there's another question mark about it. Just simply because the cost of service of cleaning and whatever is very high. If you're going to do that, you might as well hire an Uber where the driver has cleaned it, or claims to have cleaned it, whatever. Or you might even think twice about travel. And I think that's the thing that I take away from this is that people may start to think twice about that discretionary trip into London. They may think twice about, now once they've gone over today's shock of the shops being open again, I think we might see just less travel per se, just because people have realised that you can get stuff delivered at home, those who didn't, that you can work on Teams or Skype or Zoom for those who didn't before. Why would I go into work 4 days a week when I could do 3 days a week, whatever? I think lots of large companies in places like London that have very, very large corporate headquarters will look and go, well, we managed to keep 95% of our business going with 15% of the people in the office and 85% of them working from home. The CEO of Barclays had a very interesting point, and he said, why do we bring everyone into Canary Wharf, into this massive, great big office? What we need is loads of little sort of local meeting places, to which one of their employees said, you've got them, they're called branches, and you've been shutting them for the last 20 years. Mm. I'm sure that was, maybe an apocryphal story, but I think that's the mindset. So I think we will see less travel per se. I think we'll see, we have designed our road networks and our rail networks and our bus networks around the morning peak. If we don't quite get that morning peak back again, does that mean the way we operate our networks is going to be different? And particularly with schools, we've seen so much less morning school run traffic. When we go back in September, if we do go back, will that be the same? Secondary school kids are now, one day a fortnight or whatever 2 days a fortnight, whatever the ration is. It certainly seems to be making a difference on the morning peak. So I think we'll see a different morning peak to what we've done, and I think we'll see different travel patterns. So mass maybe be a tool, autonomy maybe a tool, but you would expect me to say this. I think connected vehicles certainly a tool, because we've been able to anonymously use them to work out what's going on in the network. Are ports still operating? Are people still parking? Are they going into town centres or other places? That's just a very useful indicator. And finally, if we're changing traffic signals so that we allow people to walk and cycle, then we need to know how we're impacting that on the network. So again, connected vehicles of all types, including cyclists and even pedestrians, very useful there.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about working from home. You're sitting in your home office, I'm sitting in my home office, and you've worked from home largely, only traveling to meetings, conferences, presentations, that sort of thing when you need to. Same with me for many, many years. It seems the rest of the world has caught up on this now. And I think whatever happens with the new normal, whatever happens with social distancing or people being concerned about catching the virus, and seeing some of the footage of people outside shops in Oxford Street doing anything but social distancing suggests the public might be quite happy over time to forget about their fears and go back to the old ways of travelling. I don't think companies are going to go back to the old ways of having everybody in the office 5 days a week, and that's suddenly going to open up more capacity that we haven't had before. So if we do go back to no need for social distancing at all, which isn't definite but is possible, I think we're going to see 10, 20, 30% increase in capacity just by people not having to travel to and from work every day, because they can do at least a good proportion of their work at home. Does that mean that our technology needs to catch up with things like season tickets on trains, where the idea of you having a season ticket where you travel at peak time as often as you like, 5 days a week peak time, and then obviously any weekend work you fancy, we're going to have to invent a new way of delivering that for whatever the new normal is?
Well, I think the Department of Transport's already on that. The kind of 2-3 day a week season ticket might be an off-peak season ticket, might be very flexible. Because in my kind of model of the future office, you have loads of people working at home, but every so often they all come in to meet, to exchange ideas, to do the social bit, to wish Paul a happy birthday, etc. And that doesn't require as much space as it did. But also doesn't require them to be there at 9. They probably want to be there at 2 and have a cup of coffee and maybe a beer afterwards and that kind of stuff. The social bit of work, I think, is really, really important. I think it's where some of the good ideas come from. Trying to do complicated negotiations without being able to sort of go outside and have a quick word in somebody's ear is quite challenging. I also think there's possibly a bit of a challenge there for younger members of staff, because it's fine for me to have worked at home for 14 years or whatever it was, but that's because I kind of know what I'm doing by now. But if you're a young graduate or an apprentice, you want somebody to go on and ask a question to and just check you've done the right thing. But equally, you want that kind of support to be there. And also, if you're young, you want the social bit of work. Some stat about how many people meet their partners at work, I can't remember what it is, but it's a substantial proportion. So I think we might end up with a slight dichotomy there. Also, if you're young and you're a graduate and you live in a shared house and you've got one internet link and one dining room table, it must be quite hard work being young and working from home when your home is as I had for many years, a sort of dungeon in a house. I suspect ironing boards and deck chairs and all sorts of things have been repurposed. I would hope our young readership are innovative enough for that. But I do think we just need to not all look through the telescope of senior management, middle-aged people who commute into London, because many of the people who are cycling into London would have been cycling anyway, because that's what they choose to do and that's the way they've grown up. So I think it'll be very interesting over the next few years, really interesting the way it all pans out.
I got phoned up by the BBC a month or so ago, and they were doing a feature on the future of transport, and they wanted me to dig out a spokesperson or two about it. And they asked me what my thought was on what is the future of transport. And my answer was, if somebody tells you they know what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years, then they're lying, because they don't. And I don't think my opinion's changed in the 4 to 6 weeks since I had that conversation.
No.
People don't know anything. They might reckon something. They might have an ill-informed or an informed reckon, but that's the best it is. So if I were to put you on the spot and not ask you to reckon, but ask you what the known unknowns are that we should be looking at as we start to plan our way through that. And I think your comment there about younger professionals needing that helping hand in the office to do that is one really good example. But what should a transport planner or a traffic manager or a highways engineer be considering as the options as we start coming out of this? Okay,
so there's a few things. I think internet delivery, those people who kind of a bit skeptical about Amazon before, they'll love it now. They've been their lifeline. In our street, organising Tesco deliveries for elderly people. They love Tesco's deliveries now. They don't need to go to the shops. Whether they'll continue that, I don't know. So I think internet deliveries, light goods vehicles, accessibility. Why Sainsbury's, Tesco's, etc. don't run one van down the road, dropping everybody's stuff off on one day a week, with one order, I don't know. Somebody said, oh, we can make it an electric vehicle. And I said, yeah, and you could have a bloke who runs it called Ernie, and you could call him a milkman. It'd be just like the milk trot. I'm thinking that our HGV services have done well to keep going. I think the private car, we spent too long designing the network for the 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock morning peak. I think we should take some of the network away for cycling and walking, make that more simple. I think we've got to reflect that when it does rain, we won't get the cycling that we've got. We need to still think about that. I think we need to think about if we get a second spike, or if we get COVID-20 or COVID-21, what lessons that we're going to have, what we're going to have on the shelf ready to go. I think flexibility, you know, we used to think about, we'll have a load of metrics of a road network that are all about journey time reliability. Well, actually, that goes out the window, because you can go at what speed you want to, and some of the speeding data we've seen has been horrendous. But we're now starting to go back to that point. When we were at our lowest peak, I worked it out that we were at 1955 traffic levels. So if you take the vehicle miles that were done in 1955, that's where we were. I guess we've going back a couple of years every week now. But I still think we're probably at 20th century traffic levels. I'll go and do some sums on that, it'd be interesting. But I think what we'll see is that the demand for cars will go up. So the market for a sub £5,000 car now is zinging, because lots of people are saying, right, I can't use public transport, I don't want to use public transport, I do want to drive everywhere. I think the market for new cars may suffer, because who wants to spend a lot of money when you might be furloughed next time, or you might have debt. And I'm worried about the whole rollout of EVs, because they're generally expensive. So I think we'll see a lot of, unfortunately, older vehicles still on the road for emissions. So that means something you need to think about in terms of traffic light running, low emission zones. I think the greening of transport, electric charging points are great if you've got lots of electric vehicles. Tesla was doing very, very well because it had launched all its new cars at once and was best-selling car in the UK for a month or two. I just don't see the emphasis on new cars being as much as it was. Having said that, you can get a very nice car for a couple £100 on a personal credit plan, a couple £100. You know, if you've got a job, does it really matter? But I do think we'll see, my big takeaway is I think you'll see a lot of older vehicles still on the road instead of people using public transport, which is a shame. But you started off the call with government saying, use the car if you can. And I think that might have caught on.
Andy, we're out of time, which means I haven't had a chance to talk to you about parking and revenues and the environment that you've just touched on at the end with older cars on the road, etc., etc. So we'll have to hold those thoughts off for another time. But thank you for joining me for the last half hour and giving some of your thoughts on the present situation. And I think anyone who doesn't know you, who's just watched this, will know why you've had your finger in so many transport technology projects over the last 20 to 30 years. Andy Graham is owner of White Willow Consulting. He's the forum chair of the ITS UK Connected Vehicles Forum, and he's been our guest on this coronavirus webinar. Thank you for watching. We'll go back to one of our panel conversations next week. Join me then. Thank you.